So this week's Parshas is Parshas Vayeshev. In this week's Parsha we have the sale of Yosef into slavery in Egypt, the deception of Yaakov about that, the very interesting and unusual story of Yehudah and Tamar, and the experiences of Yosef in Potiphar's household in Egypt. Three main stories there. So Parsha begins with discussion of how Yaakov loves Yosef more than all of his other children, because he's the firstborn son of Yaakov's favorite wife Rachel, who is passed on, and Yaakov gives him a special kutonas pasim, coat of many colors that's famous. What is kutonas pasim? A kutonas is a tunic, but the pasim, what that actually means is not entirely clear. Most of the commentators have said as striped or colorful. There's a relationship you can get from Akkadian, where possum garment is an elaborate court cloak where they wore in decorative tunic that's worn by officials in the court of the kings in Ugarit, which is a city which is now called Ras Shamra in Syria, but it was a very important ancient city in approximately the time that the narrative that patriarchs from Yitzchak Yaakov were living. Anyway, they spoke a language very, very closely related to Hebrew, ancestral to both biblical Hebrew and Aramaic. But anyway, Yaakov gave Yosef a very fancy coat, and this annoyed Yosef's brothers, and they didn't like him because he is also always tattling on them to their father. And then Yosef has two dreams, one where his everybody's harvesting grain in a field, and they tie it into sheaves, bundles, and bundles belonging to Yosef's brothers would bow down to his. And the other dream is that the sun and the moon and 11 stars come and bow to Yosef. And he tells this one, first one he doesn't tell to Yaakov, he tells the brothers brush it off. He says they intend to, with him, it's like, you're telling us you're going to rule over us. And he goes to Yaakov for the second one with the stars, and Yaakov dismisses equally. He says, is that me, your mother, and your brothers going to bow down to you? And he says, the implication that Yaakov makes, of course, is that Yaakov is dismissing it because the sun represents Yaakov, the moon represents Rachel, Yaakov's mother, Yosef's mother, but Rachel is dead, and has been for some time, and so it can't possibly be a dream that has any meaning because as the principal person in Yosef's mother is no longer alive. The Mefarshims imply that it could have meant Bilhah, who was Yaakov became Yaakov's primary wife after Rachel died. And anyway, so the brothers then go to pasture their flocks in Shechem, and Yaakov sends Yosef to go look for them. and bring him back word. Yaakov is at this time living near Hebron, and they're in the south. So Yaakov's in the south, and the brothers are brought their sheep up a little into the north, a little farther north, and so he goes looking for them. And they're not near Shechem, and he finds a person, a man, who tells them that they've left the Shechem area and they went to Dosan. Dosan is a town located some short distance north of Shechem, and it's up on a hill. It's not even not a hill. It's so it's about 60 miles or so from Hebron. So the brothers see Yosef coming, and everybody knows the story. Decide to kill him, and Reuven argues that they shouldn't kill him because that would be bad, and he'd throw him into a pit. And Reuven's intention is that he would come back when no one was looking and rescue Yosef. And so the brothers take Yosef and they throw him in a pit, and they take his coat, some of his possum, and they throw him in a pit. And the pit is empty, and there's a dry pit. And the Mepharshim comment that the dry pit is kind of redundant. One would assume that a pit would be empty, unless, and so many of the Mepharshim say, well, there wasn't any water in it, but there were snakes and scorpions. But that's not necessarily obvious from the text of the Torah. Anyway, and then they go and have dinner. So, it's not a very nice thing to do. They've tossed Yosef into a pit, left him, and they go off and have a snack. And while Reuven is gone, and at that time, while they're eating their dinner, along comes a caravan, towards the Yishmaelim, descendants of Ishmael, coming from the direction of Gilad, which is area east side of the Jordan River, and they're carrying spices with them. And Yehudah gets up and he says, "Hey, what's in it for us killing Yosef? Let's sell him to the Ishmaelites, and we can make some money. And then we're not going to kill him. His blood won't be on us. He is, after all, our brother." So they, instead of killing their brother, they sell him into slavery. And the pasuk then refers to them as Midianites, the caravan. But then it switches back to Yishmaelim. This is a curious thing. The traditional Mepharshim say that basically that the brothers sold the Yosef to the Ishmaelim, and then the Ishmaelim sold him to the Midianites or whatever. Another possibility is that the brothers were preparing to sell him to the Ishmaelim, and the Midianites came along and kidnapped him. And but whatever way, they got 20 shekels of silver from somebody for him, and they brought him to Egypt. And 20 shekels of silver is the typical value of a slave in those days. This matches well with the archaeological historical record. Oddly enough, this is also the erech value of a male between 5 and 20 years old, which Yosef was 17 at the time. And Reuven comes back, and Yosef is gone, and he is very, very upset that Yosef is gone, and so they take the coat and they tear it, and they put it in goat blood, and they bring it to Yaakov rather, and Yaakov sees it, and he's terribly distraught that Yosef's coat is torn, it's covered in blood, and he assumes that Yosef has been killed. And Yaakov's children, it says sons and daughters, implying that Yaakov had daughters other than Dinah. Daughter-in-laws perhaps try to comfort him, but he won't be comforted, and he says he's going to go down to the grave mourning for Yosef. And the Midianites, it says, in the end, they sold him in Egypt to a guy named Potiphar, who was the Sar HaTabachim for Paro. An interesting comment, I think, is that Potiphar is a very solid Egyptian name. It means something like given by Ra, the sun god of Egypt. Very good, solid, classic Egyptian name. Later on, Potiphar is identified as Kohen On, a priest of the city of Inu or Onu, which is known in Greek as Heliopolis, which was the temple of Ra, the sun god, in Egypt. And so Potiphera is a very good, solid, traditional Egyptian name, and it's a great name for somebody who is associated with the priesthood of Ra to have. So this all fits in nicely. Another interesting thing is that Sar Tabachim, and it's often translated as a chief butcher. It also has the implication of chief cook for Paro. In that time, Middle Kingdom Egypt, the title of chief cook was a major court title in the pharaonic household. The chief cook wasn't just the guy who cooked dinner for Pharaoh. He probably never actually cooked for Pharaoh, but it was one of the heads of the household. It's like central of the household as a person who was a household administrator for Pharaoh. And in ancient times, the household administrators, the butlers, and things like that were very, very important figures in royal courts. So Yosef is sold to somebody. You think nowadays he's the chief cook or the chief butcher. This is some schlub in the kitchen. No, Potiphar is priest of one of the most important gods in the Egyptian society, and he's also the one of the his title implies that he's one of the highest officials in the Egyptian royal court. And so Yosef isn't being sold to just anybody. He's being sold to somebody who's the equivalent of cabinet level secretary, minister in the Egyptian court. One wonders about Yaakov's sons, Yosef's brothers, and how they could do this. This is seems like a terrible, awful thing to do, and it's difficult to reconcile with the attitude that many people have that the avos, the ancestors, were tzaddikim, gemurim, complete tzaddikim, and they never did anything wrong. And it goes through many, many convoluted justifications to believe that justify why the brothers felt that they had a legitimate grievance where they could actually kill or sell their brother into slavery. As arguments that that the firstborn right to leadership belonged to either Reuven or to Yehudah, as the case may be, and that Yosef, by pushing his dreams that they were going to bow to him, they felt that he was being rebellious against the authority, and there is a halacha that a person is mored b'malchus, is rebels against the legitimate government, the kingship, can be punishable by death. If this is halacha, it's like you rebel against the king, try to overthrow the king, life's forfeit. So the argument is that it's like his mored b'malchus, is Yaakov is still alive, Yaakov is the leader, he's saying he's going to be the king, and Yosef, that Yaakov is going to bow down to him. This is insulting and implying that he's going to take the place of Yaakov as the leader of the household of house of Yisrael, of Yaakov, and this is an insult to their father, an insult to his authority as a leader. But still, it's a nasty thing to do to your brother. He's just a 17-year-old. They took their dreams seriously in those days. The next part of the Parsha is Yehudah and Tamar. There's a digression between... So Yehudah, it says at that time, Yehudah leaves the rest of his brothers. He goes off and marries a Canaanite woman. It was the daughter of Bas Shua, a daughter of a man named Shua. He marries her and he has 3 sons, Onan, and Shelah. And then Yosef, Yehudah's son, is married off to a woman named Tamar, but doesn't want to something displeasing to the Lord. He was wicked, and he died without having any children. And Yehudah tells Onan he has to marry his sister-in-law. This is in keeping with the institution of Yibum. That's later on. And Onan, knowing that his child with Tamar would not count as his, it would rather be counted to doesn't want to get her pregnant, and as they say, he threshed within and winnowed without, and he died too. And then Yehudah doesn't want to give Shelah to Tamar because he's afraid that the same fate would await him. And then Tamar dresses up as a prostitute after Bas Shua dies, and she goes sits at the crossroads, and Yehudah does the thing with her, and she gets pregnant with twins. And he sends somebody to go pay her, and there's nobody there, and they say, there's never been a prostitute around here. And you find out that Tamar is pregnant, and Yehudah says, she should be executed because she's obviously committed adultery. She's bound to Shelah through the rules of Yibum, and she brings out Yehudah's seal, and Yehudah acknowledges that the children are his, and she's saved. And she has twins, Peretz and Zerach, and Peretz later goes on to be the ancestor of David HaMelech. Another confusing story. It's like, how could Yehudah, who is so righteous, engage in services of a prostitute? Another difficult question, on which there is many unsatisfying answers for. And the end of the Parsha happens to Yosef in Potiphar's house. Yosef takes a high place in Potiphar's household. His wife becomes jealous of the handsome young lad, tries to seduce her. Eventually, she tries to grab him. He slips out of his coat and gets away, and then so she accuses him of trying to rape her, and Potiphar throws him in prison. And while he's in prison, he meets the cupbearer and the baker of the king, and he interprets their dreams for them. And he says, when you get out of prison, the cupbearer is restored to his position, the baker is executed, just as he's predicted, and he asks them to remember him, and he sits in prison because the cupbearer forgets about him. Again, the cupbearer and the baker, this isn't just the waiter and guy who breaks bread. These were important officials in the court of the Pharaoh. And so that's the end of the Parsha. A lot of difficult things to understand, difficult stuff that I don't really have any satisfactory answers for. I've never really been satisfied by any of the classical Mefarshim who explain or attempt to explain or apologize for the behavior of the Shvatim in selling Yosef, or how account for the behavior of Yehudah with Tamar either. The obvious, straightforward answer that goes against much of what is, a traditional view of these people is absolutely righteous, is that they were human beings suffering from jealousy and anger and lust and all the other negative emotions that everybody suffers from. And I've always liked to see these sort of stories as an indication of the Torah's insistence on the humanity of our ancestors. Unlike how we tend to perceive these people nowadays as these superhuman, supreme beings, near angelic in their perfection and purity, the Torah, if you just read the words in the Torah, implies and emphasizes their humanity and their failings, strengths, and weaknesses. And in my mind, this is actually a positive thing, is that the Torah is not shy about bringing light to the faults of our heroes. Nobody's perfect. Everybody fails, and everybody has problems in life. And it's actually, to my mind, should be a strengthening message to us. That, look, these are our great ancestors who were the founders of our nation, and yet the Torah is not embarrassed and not shy to point out that they did things that weren't always 100% righteous and perfect and flawless, and that yet they still merited to be our ancestors and to be these great people who we still look up to today. And it's a message for us who are, in our world, we're not as close to God, and we're not as close to the Torah and to the ways of Hashem as they were. And if these great people could fail and could have problems and could make mistakes and could do bad things, and yet they still were able to redeem themselves and able to merit being our great ancestors, then there's hope for all of us in our failings and faults, that we don't have to be perfect, and we don't have to be flawless, and we don't have to be angelic beings. We just have to be the best people that we can possibly be. And I think that's the main, for me, the main take-home message of this parsha and other stories and narratives like this, the ones in this parsha. I mean, I said it with Parshas Noach, that Noach is not flawed, is a flawed character. All of and this is a thing that's very controversial, and and if I say this in the right places, they'll decree me a heretic and a heathen and all that sort of stuff. So be it. But I think, like I said, I think it's a very positive thing, is that we should understand that people are people, and when we make mistakes, it's not the end of the universe, and it's not the end of the world. That we do tshuva for our mistakes, we feel bad for our mistakes, and we try to fix them. And we don't have to be perfect, and we don't have to be flawless. So next week, it's Parsha. We continue the story of Yosef in Egypt. Yosef meets Paro and becomes a high mugwump in the Egyptian government. Until then, good Shabbos.